It's winter, 43. The outskirts of Harbin in Japanese-occupied Manchuria are a frozen graveyard. Temperatures plunge below -20. Snow hangs heavy on barbed wire fences. And behind those fences lies a place few have seen, and none have survived. Inside one of its low grey buildings, under flickering fluorescent lights, a man lies strapped to a table. His skin is pale against the wood. His breath escapes in short, panicked bursts, misting in the icy air. His eyes dart between the figures around him. There is no anaesthesia, no restraints beyond the leather belts at his wrists and ankles. He is awake, alert, and utterly helpless. Around him stand men in spotless white lab coats. Their faces are still, blank, professional. They do not speak to him. They do not speak to each other. They only watch. A scalpel is selected with care. It gleams briefly under the harsh light. A hand moves forward, steady and practiced. This is not surgery. This is experimentation. And it is not the work of a madman. It is the work of a system. One with funding, support, and a man at the helm who believes deeply in what he's doing. That man is Shiro Ishii, a decorated army officer, a trained physician, a man who once stood in lecture halls and argued that science must serve the empire. To those who knew him, Ishii was brilliant, egotistical, yes, but undeniably intelligent. He rose fast, talked faster, and charmed his way into the highest circles of power. But what he built out here in the Manchurian snow was something far darker than patriotism or science. It was a laboratory of death, a man whose experiments would shock the world, but whose name too few remember. Shiro Ishii was born in 1892, in a quiet corner of Chiba Prefecture. His family was wealthy. Not royalty, but close enough to walk the same halls. His father, a prominent landowner, had money, land and connections. Shiro? He had no need to earn his place. He expected it. Even as a child, Ishii stood out, not for his kindness or his discipline, but for his arrogance. He believed himself special, destined. He had no patience for rules, no respect for authority, unless it benefited him. Teachers called him brilliant, classmates called him unbearable. He was the kind of boy who'd memorize a textbook in a day, then smugly correct the teacher in front of everyone. The kind of student who excelled not because he loved learning, but because he loved winning. In 1916, Ishii entered Kyoto Imperial University, one of the most prestigious institutions in Japan. And there he found his obsession, germ theory. The idea that invisible organisms, bacteria, viruses were the key to understanding illness. While other students spoke of healing, Ishii saw something else, power. He was fascinated by how diseases spread, how quickly they could jump from one body to another, how entire cities could be brought to their knees, not by bombs, but by microbes. Some of his professors were impressed by his intellect, others quietly unnerved by his lack of empathy. Ishii didn't see patients. He saw test subjects, numbers, systems to be optimized. He was also, by all accounts, a show-off. He carried a gold-handled walking stick, spoke with theatrical flourishes, called himself a man of vision. Even in an age of rising nationalism, his speeches about science and empire came across as a little too eager. He believed Japan had a destiny, not just to expand but to dominate, and that science, his science, would lead the way. In another life, Ishii might have been a university lecturer, a harmless eccentric, but history had other plans. Japan was militarizing. Resources were pouring into research, into medicine, into weapons. And Ishii saw an opportunity, not just to rise, but to reshape the very nature of war. By the early 1920s, Japan was shifting. The empire was expanding. Nationalism was rising. The military had begun to take the reins of government, and with that came a hunger for new ways to fight future wars. Into this scene stepped Ishii, now a qualified doctor, fresh from Kyoto Imperial University, and already convinced he was the smartest man in every room he entered. He joined the Imperial Japanese Army Medical Corps and immediately started climbing. Not because he was dutiful or disciplined, but because he charmed. He flattered the right generals. He gave speeches that made biological warfare sound not only possible, but noble. A clean, efficient weapon for a modern empire. He wasn't shy about his ambitions. He told anyone who would listen, "Why waste bullets when bacteria can win wars? Why bomb cities when we can infect them?" And he made one promise over and over again. With the right research, Japan can become untouchable. He gave performances, really. Dramatic lectures with petri dishes, slides, and big promises. The generals ate it up. He wasn't just pitching science, he was pitching domination. In the late 1920s, Ishii was sent abroad. Germany, France, the United States. He travelled under the pretense of medical research, water sanitation, epidemic control, but his true focus was always biological warfare. He visited labs, met microbiologists, even toured Fort Detrick, the American Center for Chemical and Biological Research. He watched, he learned, he took notes. But unlike many in the West, who saw germ warfare as a theoretical threat, Ishii was already planning how to use it. And what he lacked in ethics, he made up for in sheer obsessive energy. He was described as sleeping 4 hours a night, scribbling endlessly in notebooks, pacing while muttering to himself about anthrax, cholera, plague. He wasn't just brilliant, he was relentless, and now he had military funding behind him. In 1932, after Japan's invasion of Manchuria, the empire needed a presence in the newly occupied territory. Ishii was sent with a mission to head a research facility under the name the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. It sounded harmless, sanitary, even humanitarian, but behind that name, Ishii built something else entirely. On the outskirts of Harbin, he chose a stretch of land where the snow never melted and the winds howled like screams. There, with government backing and an endless supply of prisoners, Chinese civilians, Soviet spies, political dissidents, he constructed what would later be known as Unit 731. He ordered incinerators, operating tables, and specially designed chambers for frostbite tests. He designed cages for rats, not to study them, but to infect them with plague and release them into villages. He requested prisoners with specific conditions: children, pregnant women, old men, even twins. For comparative data, he said. He built a death lab and called it science. There are no diary entries full of guilt, no hesitation in letters, no nightmares reported by colleagues, just results, reports, data charts, and a grin when he talked about them. He believed in what he was doing. He believed it would make Japan great, and he believed he would be the one remembered for it. He was no mad scientist, he was worse. He was methodical, strategic, and fully in control. The hallways stank of bleach, blood, and fear. The operating tables were thick wood, darkened by years of fluid. Everything was catalogued, everything measured. They kept precise data: organ weights, blood viscosity, respiratory rates, tissue rot. But their subjects weren't volunteers. They were prisoners. There was no anaesthesia. That was the point. Vivisection. The dissection of a living person was routine. Some were infected with plague, cholera, syphilis. Then opened alive so Ishii's researchers could study the progression of disease minute by minute. They removed organs while the patient thrashed. They injected air into arteries to induce embolisms. Others had their stomachs removed and esophaguses sewn directly to intestines, just to see what would happen. One chamber was for pressure tests. Men were sealed inside a steel room, and the air slowly reduced until lungs burst. In another, frostbite testing, arms soaked and left to freeze. When ice crystals formed, skin was beaten with sticks until it rang like a drum. Then the tissue was thawed, slowly, quickly, with fire, with urine. Muscle peeled back to observe necrosis in real time, always awake, always alive, until they weren't. Ishii raised fleas infected with bubonic plague, thousands. He released them into sealed chambers with prisoners to test infection speed. When results were satisfactory, they packed the fleas into ceramic bombs designed to shatter on impact and release plague across enemy cities. He called them black rain weapons. Gas chambers were next. Each subject was exposed to a different chemical, phosgene, mustard gas, cyanide, with dosage carefully increased. Some screamed, some bled from the eyes. Notes were taken until respiration ceased. Then there were burn tests, freezing, amputation, and forced pregnancy experiments to measure transmission of disease from mother to fetus. The bodies were destroyed in on-site incinerators, bones crushed to dust. And every night Ishii sat in his private study, drinking sake, reviewing charts. No remorse, just data. He wasn't guessing, he wasn't experimenting blindly. He had goals, metrics, graphs. He was building a scientific method for mass murder. The aim was simple: make bioweapons more efficient. The victims weren't people, they were numbers. And Ishii was proud of the numbers. By mid-1945, Japan was crumbling. The Allies were closing in, cities were burning, the Emperor would soon surrender. And inside Unit 731, Shiro, he ordered mass executions of remaining prisoners. Hundreds shot, poisoned, or vivisected in a final frenzy. The bodies dumped, burned, buried deep in the snow. Every record, every slide, every data sheet he couldn't take was destroyed. Furnaces ran for days. Filing cabinets were emptied into flames. Freezers melted. Lab animals burned alive in their cages. Then Ishii disappeared. He changed into civilian clothes, shaved his head, and with a forged name and clean hands, boarded a train back to Japan. Just another lost doctor in a sea of returning soldiers. When the Americans arrived, Unit 731 was gone. Empty, silent, just a few buildings left, and a smell no one could explain. But rumours spread. Japanese officers talked, Soviet POWs gave testimony, and soon US intelligence knew there had been human experiments, germ weapons, and someone had led it all. They started asking, where is Dr. Ishii? But by then Ishii was already sitting in a quiet home outside Tokyo, waiting, watching, and preparing for one final negotiation. After the war, American forces occupied Japan. They arrested generals, politicians, soldiers. They held trials in Tokyo. Dozens were hanged, hundreds imprisoned. But Shiro Ishii wasn't one of them. US intelligence had confirmed it. Unit 731 was real. The experiments had happened. They had names, dates, even surviving witnesses. But instead of issuing an arrest warrant, they scheduled a meeting in private. Ishii offered them everything: full reports, data on frostbite, gas exposure, plague bombs, infection curves, thousands of pages of meticulous documentation, all gathered from the bodies of the living. He handed it over like it was homework. The price? Immunity. No charges, no court, no jail. The man who had tortured thousands walked away. The US called the data valuable. One internal memo read, Shiro Ishii lived out his days in peace. He opened a small clinic, went on speaking tours, grew old, smiled for photos. He died of throat cancer in 1959, in his bed, surrounded by comfort, not in a prison cell, not before a judge. Unit 731 never faced justice. Not a single scientist was tried in a Japanese court. The victims received no reparations, no apology, no memorial. Most don't even have graves. They were erased, just like Ishii planned. And the legacy of Unit 731 was written not in blood, but in ink, sealed files, signed waivers, diplomatic silence. Shiro Ishii was never tried, never imprisoned, but the ghosts of Unit 731 still walk in the cold wind of history.